Hi there, and thank you for joining me for today's live reading of Fractured World, Courage in the Apocalypse collection, Babysitter of the Apocalypse by Courtney Konstantin. This is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. I swirled the dark liquid around my glass. I wasn't sure why I even dirtied a glass for the last gulp of whiskey I had in the house. Not that washing dishes had been my number one priority, since zombies became less of a movie monster and more of my waking nightmare. I threw the liquid down my throat without hesitation, reveling in the burn as it made its way down to my gut. The drinking was the one thing that helping me cope with what was going on around me, but tonight was the last time I would lose myself in it. Now the apocalypse was getting real. My apartment, the place I've stayed since it all began, was becoming overrun with the dead. It was slow at first. I would go out once a day to gather things I could find in apartments that had been abandoned. I had closed off the top floor where it looked like the superintendent had turned and fed on anyone that got in his way. And now I knew there were zombies on the first floor. My second floor place had been safe. That was why my single mother neighbor had pounded on my door 3 days in, asking me to watch her kids. She had to find her sister, who lived downtown. With a beer in my hand, I stared at her like she was crazy. But she didn't want to take no for an answer. That babysitting job has been a month long now. Thinking about the kids, I glanced down toward the bedroom where they were sleeping. The light was out and I couldn't hear a sound. Since the room was soundproof, that made sense. With an almost 2-year-old baby girl in the apartment, I quickly figured out we needed a way to keep sound in and not flowing throughout the building. The older kid, a little girl named Gabby, was only 5, but she was a huge help to me. My neighbor didn't know me well. If she had, watching a baby would have been the last thing she'd have asked. The closest thing I'd cared for was a cat, which ran away through an open window. I'd steered clear of children all my life, and now I was caring for 2 of them. When their mother didn't come home after 2 days, Gabby demanded to know what was going on. When she didn't return after a week, I had my suspicions that she wasn't coming back. Now I knew she must not have made it. Gabby knew too, but she didn't like talking about it. I treated Gabby like I treated the customers at the bar I tended, with empathy and a smile. But when attitude came out, I was quick with the retorts until I realized I was arguing with a munchkin, and it was pointless. Just like it was pointless to argue with the drunk that had fallen off his stool for the 3rd time. The similarities were endless. The whiskey wasn't taking the edge off as I had hoped. I glared at the bottle, willing it to produce more of the happy juice. Of course, nothing happened. If zombies can be real, why can't magic? I mumbled to myself. I did a lot of that now, talking to myself. Gabby was a cute kid, but there were too many curse words in my vocabulary that I didn't think I should be sharing with her yet. And it wasn't like the 5-year-old could work through my plans with me. As it was, I was still not sure what we were going to do. I had checked my fire escape, happy to find that though it was rickety, I could get down at least once with the kids. I was pretty sure I shouldn't risk it twice. The radio and TV had long gone silent, but the last transmission I had heard was about a safe zone in Canada. No problem. Normally the drive would take a day. I had a feeling it was going to be a much longer process. Canada was the only idea I had in my plan, and this was why having another living adult around would have been helpful. I wasn't sure it was the right plan. Hell, I wasn't even sure I could keep myself alive, let alone 2 kids. All I really knew for sure was we couldn't stay in the apartment much longer. The telltale shuffle and thump in the hallway outside my apartment door only reminded me we didn't have time to spare. I didn't need to open the door to know that my floor was now infested with the dead. I hadn't tried to find any other survivors, since being on my own was my normal setting. Getting out of the apartment was just the first of many steps I knew we needed to take. I had to get the 3 of us to the ground alive, assuming the metal fire escape didn't collapse and kill us in one blow. On the ground, there was a list of threats, and I wasn't really sure how to handle any of them. I ran my hand over the handle of the fire axe that's laying across my dining table. It used to hang in the apartment hallway, behind glass, which I happily broke to get to the weapon. I had never shot a gun, so this seemed like the logical option. I carried it with me each time I left the apartment to scavenge, but so far I had only used it to break in a door or 2, never on a zombie. My hope was these monsters were just like the movies. When the time came, I would aim for the head and hope to hell that the illness that took them didn't create some sort of indestructible skull around their gray matter. That idea made me snort, and I choked back the laugh that wanted to bubble out. Maybe the whiskey had done some of its job. The illness that swept the country and eventually the world wasn't something my simple mind understood. I only credited the fact that I shut myself in and didn't leave my apartment for a week when the virus started. When I did finally leave, I had a bandana over a medical-grade mask as well as an old pair of snorkel goggles I had once used on the one and only beach vacation I'd ever taken. Who knew what worked and what didn't, but here I sat, not sick, and the virus had claimed all it was going to claim. Now it was spreading through the bite of the zombies themselves. Staying near home had made it easy for me to avoid any of those threats. During the early days, watching the news was the only way for me to get information. Even without the words, I watched as the normally beautiful and well put together anchors fell to pieces in front of my eyes. Their upbeat newscast slowly began to sound like a eulogy. Before they eventually went off the air, it was revealed that members of the studio were sick. The video went dark, but the broadcast didn't cut off immediately. As I lifted the remote to turn off the TV, a scream ripped from the speakers. I sat in shock as the sounds of zombies feeding came from my TV. Grabbing my blanket and pillow, I trudged over to my futon couch. I made quick work of making myself somewhere to sleep. I had to give the girls the bedroom so we could make the space soundproof. I also wanted to be closest to the door, should anyone or anything think about visiting in the middle of the night. I wasn't sure, with the sounds of the zombies in the hall, if I would sleep much, if at all. Chapter 2. "Vicky, wake up," a hissing voice says right next to my ear. Of course, my immediate reaction is to flail and shoot straight up in bed. This only created a blinding pain in my nose where it had connected with Gabby's forehead. She bounced back and landed on her butt as I grabbed my nose and moaned, just waiting for the blood to come spurting out. When nothing happened, the tears from my eyes cleared, and I blinked against the bright sunlight that was streaming into the living room. I had apparently fallen asleep after all, and now I have a sniffling child on the floor looking at me as if I had attacked her on purpose. "I told you not to wake me up like that," I whispered to her. "But you said to be quiet, and if I'm quiet over here, you can't hear me," she replied, sniffling again. "I'm not sure why you're upset. It's my nose that got broken," I grumbled. "I'm sorry," she moaned, and a fresh wave of tears started. No, I said as I rolled off the futon to crawl over to her. I sat on my knees in front of her just as baby Tina came stumbling in. For some reason, she had my empty whiskey bottle in her hand, and she was trying to put it in her mouth. I groaned before climbing to my feet and making my way to Tina. She saw me coming, though, and tried to run back down the hallway. After catching the runaway whiskey bottle and calming Gabby, I put together a quick breakfast for them. Dry cereal and fruit snacks. It wasn't the most nutritious thing around, but right now it's the best I could do. And as they both stuffed their faces, they didn't seem concerned. "Okay, Gabby, today is the day we talked about. We're leaving today. There's too many bad people in the building now," I explained. Gabby looked at me with her eyes wide, just nodding her head. But as a thought struck her, she suddenly began to shake it instead. "We can't leave," she said. "Why is that?" I asked, though I knew the answer, and I hoped she didn't say it again. "Mommy might come home. She needs to be able to find us," she said, voicing exactly what I was not wanting to bring up today. "Gabby, we've talked about this, right?" I asked, and she nodded her head slightly while looking into her bowl of Cheerios. "I'm sorry, kid. I know you're sad. I wish I could make it better, but, well, yeah. It's just the way things are now. If your mom could come back, she would have by now. It's my job to take care of you and Tina. That's what your mom wanted." The little girl sniffled, but didn't argue anymore. We added the breakfast dishes to the pile that filled the kitchen sink. I shrugged my shoulders, knowing I'd likely never be back. I didn't have a strong connection with the apartment. It was just the place I laid my head between work shifts. However, leaving felt like a huge move. I had one duffel bag packed with the items I would carry with us. Some dried foods that I could easily carry, changes of clothing for the three of us, a few small, quiet toys for Tina, and as many diapers and wipes as I could fit. Potty training was on the list of things I needed to learn, and then teach Tina as soon as possible. Along with the duffel, I planned on carrying Tina the majority of the time. I had found a backpack-like carrier for her in the kids' apartment. Luckily, their mother also stocked diapers like a hoarder, and I hadn't run out yet. Gabby insisted on carrying her own backpack where she put coloring books, crayons, a baby doll, and a photo of their mother. At the window that led to the fire escape, I carefully pushed up the glass, glad that it was noiseless. I stuck my head out into the fresh air and looked around the alley where we would climb down. Thankfully, everything in the area is still. I knew there were zombies around every corner, but right now we just needed to get down from the building. I strapped Tina to my back with some assistance from Gabby. The little girl is always wanting to help, and luckily for me, she often knew how things worked from watching her mother. There were so many straps and clips on the carrier, but we eventually got Tina situated in it before I knelt and put my arms through the straps. Gabby was the first through the window, so I could help her easily. As I crouched to go out and then carefully bring Tina through, Gabby whispered directions to make sure I don't brain her sister with the window. On the fire escape, everything suddenly felt real, and my heart began to speed up in my chest. I breathed deeply, trying to calm my pulse before we started to climb down. I moved Gabby back from the staircase that led down to the next landing. I showed her, without speaking, that I would lead and she needed to follow closely. She nodded her understanding, though I'm not sure how good my skills are as a mime. The stairs creaked under my feet, and I found myself praying to a God I'm not sure I believe in. Belief or not, I'm promising all of the things if he ensured we made it to the ground without trouble. I struggled fitting down the stairs as my duffel was over my shoulder on one side and I carried the axe in the other hand. On the next landing, I turned to wait for Gabby, who was carefully placing her feet on each step as she comes down. I wanted to tell her to hurry up, but I knew that we would just have an accident, so I tried to find patience. When she made it to me, she smiled up at me with pride, and I just nodded and turned back to the stairs. An ear-splitting shriek came from behind me, and I spun faster than I should with Tina on my back. Gabby stared into the window of my downstairs neighbor. I immediately see what has scared her. My neighbor, old Mrs. Lowe, was smashing her face and bloody fingers against the glass. She scratched and bit at the glass, trying to get to Gabby on the fire escape. If I wasn't mistaken, I thought Mrs. Lowe ate her cats, as there was fur hanging from her open mouth. "Gabby, let's go. She can't get you," I said quietly, afraid to speak too loud and cause more sound than we're already making. Gabby seemed to be frozen in her spot, staring at the old zombie lady. I grabbed her arm and started pulling her with me down the stairs. This wasn't nearly as easy as I had hoped, as I was already struggling to get down the stairs with the load I'm carrying. Gabby finally got with the program and began to move her feet on her own, following me down to the last landing. On the landing, I looked around again, waiting a moment to see if anything was going to respond to Gabby's screams. When nothing showed up, I unlatched the ladder and slowly let it roll down. In a fire emergency, you were supposed to let it go. But I had heard the noise once, when some third-floor teenagers thought this was a good way to sneak out. Turned out, the metal clangs can be heard throughout the building. I didn't need that sound now. The rickety ladder moaned and groaned against the movement, but once it was finally fully extended, it locked into place. I looked around again, just afraid of something jumping on me the moment I got to the ground. Not to mention, I had a 2-year-old on my back. It was like carrying a Big Mac on me, just offering it for dinner. I did the mime routine again to let Gabby know I was going to climb down first. When we had discussed the plan before, she was sure she could climb down a ladder. The fall down wouldn't kill anyone, but it sure would break some bones. That was the last thing I really needed. I turned and slowly lowered myself down the rungs. I had to cling with one hand and wrap my arm around the other side, or drop the axe. I wasn't willing to lose my own weapon. When I was a few rungs down, I motioned for Gabby to start down. I figure if she's climbing right above me and loses her grip, I might be able to stop her from falling. As we climbed down, I kept my eyes up, watching Gabby's feet and hands. She's nimble and quick, making me feel old and slow. When I got to the ground, Gabby was only seconds after me. She jumped and clapped once before stopping, her face turning into a mask of fear. I looked down at her for a moment, thinking she was just scared to make noise, but then she pointed behind us. When I turned, I found a zombie blocking our way out of the alley. I cursed in my head as I heft my axe. This was the moment I would be finding out if my assumption of zombies was true. I pushed Gabby back so her back was to the building and held up my hand for her to wait. The zombie was a middle-aged man with a beer belly. He reminded me of any number of regulars at the bar I worked at. For a moment, sadness swept over me. Even before the apocalypse, I was basically alone. The regulars at the bar would share their lives with me, and it was like having windows into the world outside my apartment. Now, most of them were likely dead. When the zombie shuffled close enough, I stepped forward with the axe. I couldn't get a great rotation with Tina on my back, but this was the only way to get things done. I lifted the axe above my head, letting it whistle down on the top of the zombie's head before it could even reach me. The body immediately begins to collapse, and the axe is wrenched from my hands. "Crap," I mumbled, knowing I needed to do better than that. With my booted foot on its face, I grabbed the axe handle and began to yank it out of the zombie's head. When it came free, gray matter flew and flecked the brick wall of my apartment building. I could feel vomit fighting at my throat, and I gagged. Leaning over, I let the puke fall next to the zombie. It was at that moment that Tina decided to start crying.